Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Central Park West, 11 a.m. Barry gave us some wonderful filler right before we started. So I am pleased to announce Barry Joseph, who will be moderating a panel with himself, Nicholas Fortugno, co-founder of Playmatics, and Ashlyn Sparrow, assistant director of Weston Game Lab, in this discussion about the exciting opportunities for youth to build careers in gaming. Please welcome Barry, Nicholas, and Ashlyn.
Thank you so much. And sorry to interrupt the Mega Ram video. If you want to see more of it, let us know during the Q&A at the end. Thank you all so much for coming on the second day of Games for Change in our 19th year. Thank you for crossing 41st Street to be here with us today. So 8 weeks ago, City College of New York, CCNY, and the NYC Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment announced a new public pathway to careers in the gaming industries and related fields. The presentation over the next 45 minutes will explore some highlights, first from a 2021 study that informed the early development of this project, undertaken to learn from high school students the role games play in their lives, families, and communities. It highlights key lessons learned about youth and games while sharing techniques developed to surface examples of youth agency within gaming ecosystems. After that, we'll be hearing more about this program from Nick at CCNY. We'll be hearing from Ashlyn about her work in Chicago, and then we'll have a conversation between them and amongst all of us about the topics that are raised from this public pathway. So with that, let's jump in. Number one, teens, video games, and agency. So as I said, in 2021, just last year, CCNY and its partners sought to learn what role video games play in the lives of New York City teenagers, specifically Black and brown high school students. I entered the project well aware of what everyone says I was supposed to be watching for. Do video games make teens violent? And are they an addiction, distracting them from their studies? I was also prepared to address more positive topics like, do video games inspire an interest in STEM? And do they teach players how to approach problems? Both positive and negative topics like these certainly emerged, but when I was listening to the teens and let them drove the agenda, I found myself asking very different questions based on what they were sharing. How do you use games to manage your emotions? And how do games help you to be the person you want to be in the world? The key difference between what I had originally planned to explore, popular hopes and fears about the impact of games, and my new pivot, what youth were actually thinking and doing, can be summed up in one word: agency. A lot is written about how games might be taking agency away from teenagers, doing something to them, whether good or bad. But what I heard instead from 70 teens was how they were in charge, how they use games to take agency in the world around them. The following research findings reframe youth from being the subject of gaming's influence to being agents leveraging what games afford. Their actions are not always successful, but when the frame shifted from what games do to teens to what teens do with games, a wholly different picture emerged. Number two, lines of inquiry. The research activities were designed around two lines of inquiry, which you can see on the screen. The first line was to understand the relationship between video and tabletop games and area high school students. Games of interest included both tabletop and digital games. The second line was to understand how to connect youth interests with CCNY opportunities while advancing CCNY's ability to leverage gaming opportunities. These could be seen as two sides of the same coin: what youth needed to gravitate towards the university and what CCNY needs to have in place to attract and retain them. Number three, games teens play. Youth responded to surveys about games played in the past year. We were surprised to learn that most were playing games not shared by the majority. Those are the ones in red. In fact, only those 2 of 69 games were played by a majority. That was Among Us and Minecraft. That means most teens were playing games within a small niche. Meanwhile, the respondents all engaged in a wide range of metagaming activities, like watching games videos about gameplay on YouTube. In fact, the majority of the teens engaged with most of the activities listed, again, all in red. In other words, while they were playing different video games from one another, they were engaged in the same type of metagame activities, shifting the focus from an individual game title to shared game-related activities. Number four, what teens say when playing games. As we were preparing the research instruments, I came across a quote in a New York Times interview with Richard Tyler Blevin, known as Ninja, an American Twitch streamer, YouTuber, and professional gamer. He said, "You want to know who your kid is? Listen to them when they're playing video games when they think you're not." Perhaps nothing creates more anxieties for adults than imagining what teens are up to when no one's watching. So we asked teens to share sounds they make while playing video games when they thought their caregivers were not listening. Their responses and their reflections to those responses were turned into comic strips by us as something we can use to talk with them about. Here's some examples. Upper left, I'm gonna destroy you, go to hell, I'm gonna end your whole career. With the reflection, because I play games with my friends and we do some stupid things to each other, that makes it almost impossible to get mad at them. And on the flip side, I'm terrible. The reflection being because I get annoyed when I make mistakes that throw the game. So then we tag their responses by both tone, aggressive, mad, negative, versus friendly, inquisitive, and audience, who is directed to, opponents, teammates or friends, the game, or themselves. When it came to tone, 64% were negative. When it came to audience, 40% were directed towards themselves. When you combined into an XY axis, every box was filled in with at least one comment, but the largest fell into one box. Negative comments directed towards themselves. This led to an exploration about how youth use games to manage their feelings, often with intention. If they're feeling upset, they might choose to avoid highly competitive games. If they're feeling down, they might play a game for a quick pick-me-up. Much of this, if not all, was occurring outside the awareness of the caregivers around them. Number 5, how youth use games to be who they want to be in the world. To better understand the personal narratives youth construct using games, we asked youth the following question: how do games help you be who you want to be in the world? They spoke about using games to overcome obstacles, like an introvert using games to make friends. They spoke about using games to give them motivation and to pursue careers, like as a physician's assistant in an emergency room or work in a STEM field. They spoke about skills that help them to learn, such as critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. To explore the same concept through a more constructivist approach, we invited youth to build what we called a social mechanic ecosystem. Now, to build this ecosystem, we asked them to pick one game they play and write its name in the middle of the circle. Next, they were asked to consider all the different things they do related to the game other than play it. We already knew they were doing that. Now, each of these activities occupies one of the satellite circles, identifying what they were doing, where they were doing it, who it connected them with, and the goal of that activity. Each satellite circle then gets one word or phrase to describe what role this activity allows them to occupy in the world. Finally, in the lower right, in the me and my game, they then create a narrative that emerges as a result of all this work that shows how the game helps to support them to be or do something in the world. So, for example, in this one, the student chose the game Legend of Zelda, specifically Breath of the Wild. Here we see Zelda helps the student be an artist, drawing Zelda-related art, and a singer of Zelda melodies, a consumer of Zelda gameplay videos and Zelda music, and a quote-unquote learner of videos that use Zelda to teach game design. In the me and my game, in the lower right, the teen summarizes this all by saying Zelda helps them be someone who can take inspiration, wonder, and learning from one source, then apply it somewhere else in order to better themselves and others. 6, where youth encounter games in their neighborhoods. We challenge teens to describe their role video games play in their neighborhoods through a digital hands-on activity. We asked them to go to Google Maps and take a screenshot of any community they like. Then, inspired by the young boy's adventure in the comic strip Family Circus, as you can see on the screen, they were asked to annotate their map with locations where they might encounter games, physical and digital, and then we recorded them giving a voice narration, like a tour guide over it. So, for example, this one starts in the bottom, wee, la, la, la. So the person starts off at the library, where they're just kind of like searching up different games. And then they move on to the train station, where they see some people playing on their Switch. And then they move on to the boba shop, et cetera, et cetera. After all the maps were completed, we tallied up the most common locations and found quotes from individual maps to support each one, and then gave that list to one of the teens with the request to turn it into a composite map, which you see here, representing the most common locations teens in our study encountered video games. It thus became a journey map, identifying the key touch points between our persona of New York City teens and games in their community. 7, personal and local impact of in-person and online gaming. When asked, what would your communities lose without video games? A sense of connection was by far the most common benefit the teens reported video games bringing to their communities. As one student said, video games help to connect people. When asked the follow-up question, is there anything you'd like to change about how video games impact your community? And if so, what? Their interest in expanding accessibility and inclusivity within their community stands out. While video games were viewed as a powerful force that brought people together in their physical communities, it was also a tool through sexism and racism that kept them apart from their online communities. When we explored where the prejudice of others impacted their relationship with games, Sexism against female players was the most common concern raised, followed by racism. They consistently reported being angered and devalued by these experiences and the sense of powerlessness that accompanied them. Their most common short-term responses were to either leave the game or silence their microphone. Their long-term strategy, to hide their femininity, to play worse if they're a girl, and other tactics that hide their identity. Racism is encountered in everything from how users present themselves online to the trash talk during games. One student shared, "While playing multiplayer games, I got like hate crimed a few times. People would say the N-word to me. I have to take a break from the game because it's just not good for my mental health." There was often an understanding that inequity within the game design industry is at the root of the problem, but even when gaming companies step up to the challenge, it's gamers that need to respond in kind, and often fell short. Few confronted the prejudice directly, and none reported doing so successfully. Often, to protect themselves, the students just leave the game. Quote, "If I would ever get called N-slur or F-slur, I would just leave the game and queue for another game because I know that I can't do much besides report, but I still feel bad." We only encountered one girl who found a way to address the sexism that she found effective. Quote, "Anytime I experience sexism, I try to prove them wrong. I don't even bother trying to argue. I'd rather just show them who I am rather than tell them, you know?" For many, the sexism and racism they experience in online gaming is a reflection of prejudice in the wide world. For many, these environments become a training ground for the general powerlessness they feel about doing anything to change it. I'm going to skip the next few slides because of timing. We can come back to it if we want later on. So in summation, I began by addressing how this study refrained youth from being the subjects of gaming's influence to being agents, leveraging what games afford, shifting focus from what games do to teens to what teens do with games. While it was undertaken with a specific goal in mind, to better understand the lives of teens living in the communities of West Harlem, Upper Manhattan, and the South Bronx, to recruit them for the City College of New York, both the lessons learned and the approaches taken might be of value to anyone interested in supporting the development of today's youth to pursue their dreams. For CCNY, this study highlighted the important role the college could play opening public pathways for local youth into New York City's expanding gaming industry. It helped the college broaden its understanding of the academic potential of games from a strictly STEM-focused opportunity to a broader understanding of the vast cross-departmental interests that intersect with games and game-adjacent interests. And it helped to clarify the key institutions involved in such a pathway. As you can see here, the college in the middle, high school programs in the green, the gaming industry in red at the top with the city supporting it, the mayor's office, and community-based organizations in the yellow. And this movement is not simply one-directional, in which a pipeline directs youth into jobs, but it's multi-directional, in which all partners benefit from their involvement in the system. Finally, informed by these findings, in the spring of 2022, the Gaming Pathways program at the City College of New York was announced by New York City's Mayor Adams, a multi-million-dollar initiative designed to meet the workforce needs of the growing video gaming and related creative industries in New York City. So, what is this pathway? And why is it significant that it's a public pathway? To address that, I'd like to now turn it over to Nick Fortugno. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for For those of you not from New York, that's just like I touched the cable. Why did I touch the cable? Well, for those of you not from New York, it's a really, it's a telling thing that the clip you get here is the mayor saying that New York is #1. That's like something very New York about that to me. Yeah, so, all right, so what are we talking about? We talk about City College doing a game development program and, being involved in a game design program in CUNY. I'm working with them to develop the program, and my role will be developed more in the near future. But when we think about like what game development means, and if you're familiar with game development in the college landscape, some of it's gonna seem very familiar to you, right? It's like there's an early focus on core disciplines like game design, art, and programming. There's a move to specialization and team-based creation. It ends in a capstone project. Like, none of this should seem weird to you. It's not weird for game design programs. It's not even weird for game design programs in New York. So, like, why is this necessary? Like, why was this an important thing to have in the city university system? Well, the first thing is just talking about it as a public pathway. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the city university system, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what City College is. So this is what City College looks like. This is on 140th Street. It was founded in 1847. It was the first free public institution, collegiate institution in the country. Or at that time, it was called the Free Academy. It didn't become City College until 1866. It was not originally on this campus. This campus was built in 1895. But when it was started, it was designed by the original kind of like the city council member who had the idea in the first place, Townsend Harris, to be thought of as an institution that would reach the public, right? And when you look at what Harris said, Harris was in the council and helped found the college, then he went off to be an ambassador to China for a long time, actually, and then he disappeared. But when you read his quotes, you can see what they're talking about here. Open the doors to all. Let the children of the rich and the poor take their seats together and know of no distinction save that of industry, good conduct, and intellect. So from the origins of the city university system was the idea that this was meant to be a public institution in the true sense, right? That people could go there regardless of wealth, regardless of other experience. And the first president of the school, Dr. Horace Webster, said quite specifically this message that the experiment to be tried is whether the children of the people, the children of the whole people, can be educated, and whether an institution of the highest grade can be controlled by the popular will and not by a privileged few. Right? And remember, Free Academy is City College, right? So that's the mission of City College. And so in that sense, we see this as a really important part of the component of it, that's what's going to increase the diversity and make sure that education is reaching a new population. And if you really want that in nuts and bolts, right, this is City College on the left, this is Columbia on the right. And if you're familiar with New York City, you know that these things are like maybe 20 blocks away from each other. And it's important to like look at these things next to each other and see how they work differently, right? Columbia University, when you account for financial aid and other kinds of sponsorships, the average tuition for a student over the course of a year is $23,000. Columbia University has an acceptance rate of about 7%. On the other hand, City College, after all the financial aid comes in for all students in City College, the average tuition is $2.8 thousand a year, and the acceptance rate is about 51%, right? Now, this isn't to denigrate Columbia. Like, obviously, there are roles for these different universities, but you can see the purpose that the public university has right now in what it does in this space. And that leads us to the kind of second point, which is about this question of what it means to create a more diverse, more integrated, more representative space using a CUNY-based game design program. And for that, I want to think about this in an intersectional way, because it actually means a bunch of different things. Barry showed this flowchart, which was like really at the center of the thinking around this. And you've actually heard, if you've been following this through Games for Change, you've heard about this. The first day in the opening talk, the mayor's office, Aaliyah spoke about the mayor's side of this and the thinking about industry. And there's an industry council that's been built and the investment that the city is making, not just in the school, but in building partnerships out into the industry in the city. Later yesterday, you heard from Pip, who is representing the School of Interactive Arts, which is currently working with high school students in many, many districts in underserved communities to give them access to game design skills like programming, art, and development, so that they're a feeder up into the program. So what we want to talk about more now is the program itself, right? And so in what ways is this program meant to be inclusive and meant to bring in that kind of inclusivity? Well, for a number of ways, right? First, the goal in the program is to actually have the plan of study itself be interdisciplinary, right? It's not meant to simply be a game development program, but to touch all aspects of the academic study in City College. So in addition to doing the production disciplines we'd expect, there's also interest in developing marketing and event producing and management, and particularly thinking about that around esports. There's a very strong emphasis on social justice in the program, and that's going to be built in a deep way into the education, so that thinking about the social justice issues that the students reported, that the youth reported in the report, can be part of their education. And then using esports, and this is, again, a thing that you're starting to see pop up more and more, as a motivator to keep kids involved, is a way we're going to work overall. And then itself, there's a mission of inclusivity in the program, right? And so, Mayor Adams mentioned it on stage, but this is being built into the DNA of the program. Right now, there is a community college in New York that is currently teaching a 2-year program. It's gone on for a while. This is Hostos Community College. So there are students who are getting a game design education at the associate's level. The program is being built to allow those students to have access to a 4-year program. We're working directly with School of Interactive Arts, so the stuff that you heard Pip talk about yesterday is feeding directly into this program, and he very passionately spoke out about the need for this, that there's an avenue for their students. And then we're going to be partnering, and I can see people out here who are part of these organizations, so I'm not naming them, but we're hoping to have conversations with local advocacy, education, and arts organizations to find avenues for students to showcase work, get mentorship, network, and connect into the industry. And so we really see this as a pathway that goes from feeding into the college to entering into a career world or an arts world. And so with that, we're going to hear from someone who's done this work already.
Thank you very much, Nick. Let's get up for Nick. Let's welcome Ashlyn to talk about her work in Chicago at the Weston Game Lab, and then afterwards we'll invite Ashlyn back to join us up here for a conversation with Nick about these larger public-private issues.
All right, thank you all so much. All right, again, my name is Ashlyn Sparrow, and I work at the University of Chicago. And for those of you who might not know the city, UChicago is actually on the south side of Chicago, and so it is actually surrounded by a bunch of neighborhoods full of Black and brown people. And so my objective, and a lot of my colleagues' objectives, is to try and make the campus more accessible and feel more comfortable for people of color to be on campus and imagine themselves taking classes there. But before we get into that, I run the Weston Game Lab. This is a brand new space we opened up in 2019, and this is one of 5 labs in the Media Arts Data Design Center. It is a 10,000 square foot space full of just people making and designing things. We have a Lego table. You should come hang out with us. Yeah, I know, right? But we're focused on rapid prototyping. We're focused on building community through game development. And we're also here to be a space where young people can start making and designing games. And so there are multiple ways that we kind of make this happen. And the first way we do that is through game design workshops. I've worked over these past 10 years of getting high school students to campus and teaching them basic game design skills. We focus primarily on analog board games and card games, not because we're not interested in the digital, but we're really actually interested in having people do systems design and think about rules and building experiences without any extra fluff around it. This is great because it actually also allows us to start having them have conversations about the inequities of the world and start analyzing other systems that they interact with, whether that's the school system, whether that's the justice system, whatever that is. If you understand how to write rules and make experiences for people, you'll be able to start to analyze other social structures that you interact with over the course of your life. They produce their own board games and card games, and my lab also helps them make it super nice and professional, and we get them printed so that their games are able to teach the next generation of students. So this is a game called Hearsay, where students were really interested in helping their peers understand different birth control methods and also telling stories around that. Another pathway for us is connecting with game developers. Back in the day, the Midway Studios, creator of Mortal Kombat, used to hang out in Chicago. That's not a thing anymore, but NetherRealm is in Chicago, and they hold the license for Mortal Kombat. So Mortal Kombat has never left Chicago. But all that to say, there are a few game companies, game studios in the Chicago area that we're really interested in building connections with. For instance, this is Tommy Morangi's. He is one of the creators for Cards Against Humanity, and he does a lot of play tests in our space. We've also worked with William Scheer. He's the creator of Manifold Garden. Do play it, it's a fun game. But he also runs play tests here. And our goal is, again, to get people to know that we exist and then start to interact with our young people on campus. We also do digital and analog games ourselves. And so this is where our undergraduate population and our faculty do amazing work on campus. We have games that teach people about how sexual assault, harassment, and violence happens and what you can do to prevent it. This game is called Bystander. We also work with medical professionals to try and create health-based interventions. This is a game called Caduceus Quest, where a young person is going out and helping to solve medical issues within their community. Another game, Prognosis, where you're going around from a high level and you are trying to use the resources of the city to lower crime rates, STI rates, and teen pregnancy rates. And every time we design these games, we work directly with high school students. High school students are a part of the design process. Because again, we're really interested in moving people from from consumers to producers of games. We also do a little bit of transmedia design. This is kind of a newer form of games where we are making games that interact with the real world, that there's live performance. And we're having young people go out into their community and think about science, tech, engineering, and math solutions, or even think about climate change and how they can provide creative solutions for climate change that are not just STEM focused, but are also specific to art. So we had Seed, and then we also had Terrarium, 2 projects that we ran at UChicago. And at the end of each of these projects, we also have design challenges. So for Terrarium, we had a Futures Design Challenge where undergraduate students designed solutions. Some students created AI bots that would teach people about their CO2 output. Some people made cookbooks that said, hey, these fruits and vegetables do not exist anymore. So here's a new cookbook for you. It was more of a speculative design challenge. And so the last thing I'll say is we have a new major, media arts and design as a major. We just finished our first year. I do not have any stats about how many people are in the major. What's the gender or racial makeup? That's how new it is. I'm like, I have no idea. But it does seem to be one of the popular growing majors. And I just want to say that all of these components in the same graph that Barry and Nick showed of industry and curriculum and all these things, we're in Chicago kind of trying to do the same thing, but they're kind of, we're in the beginning steps, right? We're working with high school students. We're talking to industry people. We have a major, but we are kind of babies in this space. And so I'm really happy to have been a part of this and to see how things are operating in New York. And that is it.
Ashlyn, thank you so much. So let's transition over now to our conversation. I'm going to maybe seed the conversation with a question, but then I'm going to look to all of you to see if you have questions you'd like to ask them. So Nick and Ashlyn, you both talked about working with universities that are looking to move outside the walls of the university to connect through gaming and game design and gameplay with the communities. Can you say more about what is the role of university to move beyond its walls, and what should its relationship with the community be, and why use games to do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll happily start. UChicago has immense wealth on the south side of Chicago and has neighborhoods that are in poverty. And so for me, being a Black woman who's come to this university, I feel like we have a social responsibility to make these walls a bit more inclusive. And so instead of always focusing on people who are coming outside of Chicago and then coming in, and when things happen in the city, people want to put up walls around it, I'm really wanting people who do not feel included to come to campus, right? Because this is a place where they too belong. This is in their neighborhood. And so why can't you be a part of this campus? Why can't you be a part of the community? And in fact, by having you here, you will be able to change the culture of this university, because of what you advocate for, what you believe in, and I'm here to help. Also, as a person who's not originally from Chicago, but learned a lot about the history of it, it's like, oh, let's take it down from the inside.
Yeah, and I think the again, this flow chart we showed and the presence of SIA working with high school students is just like a really critical part of what we're doing in our pipeline over the course of the fall, the spring and the summer. Barry was very involved in sort of organizing events that brought high school students into the City College campus to be talking about game design. That's like an act of like both giving them an introduction to students and giving them an introduction to the campus, but also just getting them familiar with like some of the things they might be thinking about or talking about in the college environment. And we're working like very directly with SIA to see that path forward, right? So that the students that they are training can have an entry into the college that isn't just a sort of feeder that drops people off at the gate, but that we have a partnership that's going through the late stages of their education so that that City College is just like another home for them. Also, we're leaning a lot into the work that Professor Morrow and the team at Hostos Community College has done over many years to sort of think about what it is to introduce people to game design for the first time, who often aren't coming from like a purely straight path through high school, right? And that's another thing that we want to deeply consider because it's an important part of the equation, I think, of both what the CUNY system is doing, having been the first institution to form, for example, evening classes, right? Like thinking about what alternative styles of learning look like and how that can aid to game development as well.
Thank you both. Now, I don't want to say, does anyone have any questions? What I want to ask is, does anyone have any topics you'd like to see them explore? You see hands? Giving a chance for people who are being shy. I'm going to start over here.
It was really cool, Ashlyn, to see in the facility you were showing in the game lab having Legos and more tactile and hands-on things. By the way, where do you print everything?
What do you mean?
Oh, I know websites like the Game Crafter and whatnot. Where you
Oh,
can
yeah,
start to
we print
create.
at Game Crafter.
Wonderful,
Yep.
excellent.
Yep.
But I'm curious to hear a little bit of a discussion about the physical, tactile side of game design
Yes.
and board games and card games versus the digital video game side and what that balance is.
Absolutely.
Can you say your name and where you're from?
Alex Coulombe from Agile Lens.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Hello, Alex. Absolutely. So a lot of the students who come to our campus, they are really knowledgeable about video games. In fact, I would classify them as experts in video games. We have similar tastes, like that table that Barry showed. Those are the same exact games that my students are playing. Most of my students do not play board games. In fact, outside of Uno, Monopoly, and Sorry, everything is just like, what are these rules, right? You give them Settlers of Catan, which most expert board gamers would be like we're over Settlers of Catan, like, right? Because of that, to me, it's really important to get people to just play different games. And there are so many different types of board games that it allows for different types of modalities to happen, where it's role-playing if people want to tell narrative stories, right? Or there are more systems-based games or engine-based games. Like, there's so many things that are out there, and that being able to move things around, having people sit at a table, being able to watch people's expression is really important, especially if you're trying to, again, make experiences for people. And so that's why we focus on that tactile nature, because I want people to understand, like, the computer isn't calculating anything for you. You're doing it. You have to be the one. So if you don't understand these rules, then you can't be the one to move the piece, right? And being able to build it up from that level will then help us transition to digital games, because they're now in a place where it's like, okay, we have to code things so that the computer can move things for the player, right? That's like 2 steps removed. But here, on this tactile, analog kind of situation, you're the one. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. And then also, it's like easy. It's also making people feel like you don't need a fancy PC with whatever graphics, or you don't need to know Maya or Photoshop, and you don't have to buy these things. Whatever's in your pocket, if you have coins, if you have a piece of paper, you can make a board game, right? And so it's also helping to eliminate whatever mental block they think that game designers do. Like, game designers just make games, period, full stop, that's it. Make a game. If you can make something better than tic-tac-toe, great, you just made a game, right? And that's the thing that I like with analog games.
Yes. All of that And pedagogically, and a number of game design programs do this, and I've done this in a number of institutions too. This thing happens where, like, if you have people who have never programmed before, you introduce them to programming in a games context, they just learn programming, right? Because they hit programming problems, and their just head goes into programming problems, and they don't do any game design at all. And and this is where there have been interesting responses to this to the announcement in the press around the city investing in this, which have essentially been, why don't you just watch some YouTube videos? Why are you going to pay for this? And part of the reason why we think this is necessary is because often in environments that aren't really focused on game design is actually not taken that seriously as a discipline. Right. It's assumed that you just make programming and you make art and you make sound, and then the game just sort of magically forms out of that. And that's a denigration of the craft of game design, in my idea. And so you have this really neat thing that can happen in a college environment where some of these students have no idea how to code at all. So you put them in an introductory code class where they don't do any game stuff, or they do minimal game stuff while they're learning to code. And then you put them in an analog game class where they can just hammer on mechanics and experience, like Ashlyn was talking about. And when they do that, they learn that stuff because they're not distracted by learning code, and they just learn code somewhere else. And you get this really nice, vining, where once their code catches up, they've had time to learn the game design, and now when they're doing more sophisticated stuff, like working in Unity or Unreal, they already know the game design stuff, so you don't have to remind them. Exactly. By the way, just as an aside, while we get the next question up, people saw that they're going to reboot Puerto Rico for the time that Puerto Rico became independent.
Yes.
Yes, you should look this up if you don't know. It is a wonderful example of representation in games. They worked with experts on Puerto Rican history and culture to remake that game, and it is the case study of how you should do this.
It's finally happening now.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh my god.
For the next topic, again, there was a patient hand waiting, but I want to see if there's other hands as well. I'm specifically looking to see if we can diversify by ethnicity or gender if possible. Come back to you.
Hi, my name is Kelly Liu. I'm with Filament Games, and I have first a cheeky comment and then a topic. And the cheeky comment is that if you're wondering if Ashlyn's program is successful, in fact, I was at Chicago. I went through the Mad Center, and now I'm here. So super fantastic. And so the topic I wanted to talk about was the approach coming from a private institution versus a public institution, especially echoing everything Ashlyn has said about the University of Chicago. Even the sort of physical location of the center on campus, you have to enter into the campus, which already is like a separation. So I'm wondering if there's any sort of physical or institutional challenges with trying to make this private university space public, and how perhaps starting public can circumvent some of those challenges.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Nick, you should totally start.
Okay.
With this.
Yeah. I like how you just said working in a public institution circumvents challenges. that was a very optimistic thing to say. Yeah. I mean, I think what it means to work in a public institution is that you have an approach that's like just inherently less competitive, right? Because it's not a commercial enterprise, right? It's just obviously the tuition matters, and obviously you do evaluate students, and you want to drive students, and you want to get students that can excel. It's not like any of that's not there. But then on the other hand, CUNY doesn't care that Columbia is there. That's not a big deal. CUNY doesn't care that Columbia students are around. CUNY doesn't care that someone would go to Columbia over CUNY. It doesn't really matter. So you kind of serve in an interesting way as a neutral place, right? And I think that's the reason why I think that's so important, and why I'm emphasizing it in a lot of things I'm talking about, is that neutrality, when you think about things like networking and meeting spaces and stuff like that, who are the people who are hurt when you don't have those neutral spaces? Wild guess. Probably the kids in Harlem and the South Bronx, right? Probably those are the kids who aren't going to get access. So I think what you end up having in a really nice way is, because you don't have a need to be competitive, you can be a little bit magnanimous about inviting more people to the table, which is only good for the population that you're trying to make happen. And it is an agenda of mine in thinking of this as really trying to just sort of not just build the local community, which has to be the first service, but then to build a broader community so that the local community has access to the broader community, because they often won't, right? Those doors just don't open. And again, it's a pathway, right? we're not doing our job as CCNY if all we do is train them to be game designers. That's not the full job. We need to get them into the rooms with other people. We need to get their work seen. We need them having conversations with the advocacy groups and arts organizations and festivals. And so that gives us an ability to do that. But then I would also say, and at least this is how I feel very strongly as a teacher, all of those communities will benefit by knowing all of those communities. And students at NYU and at Parsons and at SVA and at Columbia will benefit by knowing students from Harlem and the South Bronx and seeing their creative work.
Private universities are, I don't know, wild. It's like people who are in these systems understand the social good that needs to happen, but then it's because you're under the umbrella of a large institution that they care a lot about what their peer institutions are doing. People have a hard time changing those systems, right? Chicago cares deeply about what their other peer institutions are doing. They are looking at Harvard and Yale and Princeton, but they do not care about schools that are also in Chicago, like Columbia College or DePaul. Like, those are not their peer institutions. USC, which has a really great game design program, is not the competitive institution, right? And so then it means I'm having a lot of conversations along with my colleagues, and I have great faculty colleagues. So this makes the kind of fight a little bit easier, but it's having conversations of, okay, our location on campus is hard to get to. Now I have to go directly to those high schools and say, all right, I'm gonna provide transit passes because they've just given me X amount of dollars. I'm gonna use that money to buy transit passes, and you're just going to like bust the kids right here in this very specific location because it's really hard to get to campus, right? Or I will have to have conversations about, okay, if I'm trying to diversify the faculty or lecturers here, even so for the undergraduates to get someone who looks different teaching them, I now have to have a conversation around credentials. Because again, if they don't have an MFA, the university is not gonna hire them, but there are so many Black and brown and female and non-binary game designers who you don't need an MFA to do game design. You don't need it. It's great to have if you have one, but you don't need it. Now I have to have these kind of conversations. So the fight is really interesting and weird and bureaucratic, but the people in the systems that I'm interacting with want to make change, but they're waiting for precedent to happen. So then I'm like, oh, we're just waiting for someone else to do something. It's strange.
So I am getting the signal that we'll need to wrap up. As we all know, there's a new speaker that's going to be coming in, and we need to give them the space. So here's how I'd like to wrap up. Let me see the hands again of folks who had questions or comments that you want to discuss. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's what I want you to do. Think for a moment in a phrase, or literally one question, what it would be. I still want to hear your voices. Let's hear what those are. And then please, those who can, come back this afternoon. I think it starts at 4:45. It's the Meet the Speakers. I know Nick will be there. Ashlyn will be there too. They'll both be there so you can continue those conversations. So here's a preview of what you might get to talk about. I'm going to hold the mic so we can keep quick.
Just the ecosystem and the pipeline from a group of excited graduates to actually start to enrich the city that they're from by creating games within that city once they graduate.
And your name and where you're from?
I'm Ben. I'm from New York, and I'm a game designer.
Nice.
Excellent. Chris Everfi from DC, and my question is really the applicability outside of game design. So I had interns from a game lab from American University. There aren't game design jobs, but the skills are immensely valuable in lots of different areas. So how do we kind of continue and educate the community about that too?
Thank you. And I see over here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious about some of your work with high school age students and getting them who maybe their only experience playing games is entertainment games, and getting them inspired and engaged with making educational games, and some of getting around their preconceived notions about what an educational game is or has to be, and has to look like.
And your name and where you're from?
Jack from Pittsburgh, PA.
Sure, thank you. I think I saw the last hand back here.
Pennsylvania.
Did I see a hand? Where was it? I saw a hand. I thought, yeah, okay.
I'm curious the future of like will games eventually replace like the high school photography class or even like the art class? Like, is that like 10 years from now, could we see like games like in public education as like getting, like being there in the future.
Your name and where you're from?
Andrew and from New York.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming with us today. Please come at 4:45 and help continue the conversation. And please give it up for Ashlyn and Nick.
Guys.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Games for Change.
Thank
and all the
you,
support
thank
staff
you. That
who made
was
this happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, you guys. And join us here at noon for the power of place, accounting for the local in XR projects.